CEO's Exile and a shocking comeback. One sentence that changed everything. Pack your desk. You're done here. The words slammed into the room like a gunshot, and every person sitting at the long glass table froze. Daniel Carter stood still, his hands resting on the folder he had prepared all night, his heart beating fast but his face calm. Just 1 hour ago, he was the CEO. Everyone praised the man who built the company from a small garage in Ohio to one of the biggest tech firms in the United States. Now, in a room full of suits, power, and cold eyes, he was suddenly nothing. Say that again, Daniel said, his voice steady even though his chest felt tight. The chairman didn't blink. You heard me, he replied. You crossed a line. A woman on the board leaned back and laughed softly. You asked questions you weren't supposed to ask. Daniel looked around the table, searching for one friendly face, one person who would speak up, but no one did. I asked why millions of dollars were missing, Daniel said. That money belonged to workers, to families. The chairman stood up slowly. This company doesn't need a hero, he said. It needs silence. The security guard stepped closer, and that's when the room changed. Daniel felt it, not fear, but clarity. He leaned forward and spoke quietly, yet every person heard him. If I walk out of this building today, he said, everything you're hiding will come with me. For half a second, no one breathed. Then laughter broke out, loud and sharp. You're finished, the chairman said. No one will believe you. The guards grabbed Daniel's arms and pulled him toward the door. As he was dragged past the window, Daniel saw reporters outside, cameras ready, waiting to be told who the villain was. The elevator doors closed on his old life, and his phone buzzed in his pocket. One message, unknown number, just one sentence. They betrayed you because you were right. Daniel stared at the screen as the elevator dropped. He didn't know who sent it. He didn't know what came next. But one thing was clear: the company that erased him had just made the biggest mistake of its life. You don't exist anymore. The news anchor's voice echoed from the motel TV as Daniel Carter sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring at his own face on the screen like it belonged to a stranger. The headline burned in red letters: Disgraced CEO fired for misconduct. Daniel felt a slow, deep pain settle in his chest. Overnight, the story had been rewritten. He wasn't the man who built the company. He wasn't the leader who protected workers. He was now the villain. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't support, it was his bank account temporarily restricted. Then another message: health insurance terminated. Daniel let out a short breath, not angry, not scared, just stunned by how fast loyalty disappeared in America when power pointed its finger at you. He walked to the motel bathroom, splashed water on his face, and looked at himself in the mirror. They erased you, he whispered. When he stepped outside, people recognized him. Some stared, some turned away. One man muttered, "That's him," like Daniel carried a disease. At a small diner, the waitress hesitated before taking his order. "You're that CEO, right?" she asked carefully. Daniel nodded. She paused, then said quietly, "My husband worked at your company. You always treated people fair." That sentence hit harder than any insult. Daniel swallowed. "Thank you," he said. She gave him coffee on the house. That night, back in the motel, there was a knock at the door. Daniel didn't answer right away. "Daniel Carter," a calm female voice said. "I'm not here to hurt you." He opened the door slowly. A woman stood there, tall, sharp-eyed, wearing a dark coat like she belonged to the night. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. "Someone who knows you were fired for asking the wrong question," she replied. She stepped inside and placed a folder on the table. "Your board stole money. Lots of it. And they blamed you." Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Emails, numbers, signatures with his name forged after he was gone. "Why help me?" he asked. The woman looked straight at him. "Because powerful people get careless when they think they've won." She turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "If you want justice," she said, "you have to disappear first." The door closed. Daniel stood alone, heart racing, realizing his exile had just begun and the real fight was finally starting. "From this moment on, you are nobody," the woman said, and Daniel Carter knew she meant every word. For the next 2 years, his name slowly faded from the world he once ruled, and the man who used to sign million-dollar deals now cleaned office floors after midnight in cities across the United States. He worked quietly, wearing a borrowed name, listening more than he spoke, watching how power really moved when cameras were gone. In tall buildings, he saw workers afraid to speak. In small rooms, he saw men whisper lies with smiles. Every mop he pushed, every broken machine he fixed, reminded him of the people his old company claimed to protect but quietly crushed. At night, Daniel wrote everything down: names, habits, patterns, because injustice always repeated itself if someone paid attention. The woman, Ruth, met him only a few times a year, always briefly, always serious. "They think you ran," she told him once in a dark parking lot. "They think you broke." Daniel shook his head. "No," he said, "I'm learning." He learned how fake reports were written, how money vanished through small doors no one checked, how fear kept good people silent. Once, while cleaning a tech office, he saw his old company's logo glowing on a screen, celebrating record profits, and his hands shook not with anger, but with patience. "They're louder now," Ruth said later. "That means they feel safe." Time hardened Daniel, but it didn't make him cold. When a young janitor asked him why he worked so hard, Daniel replied, "Because someone has to care when others don't." One winter night, Ruth finally placed a thick folder in his hands. "This is everything," she said. Daniel opened it slowly. Bank trails, emails, secret accounts, names he recognized all too well. "When?" he asked. Ruth looked at him closely. "Soon," she replied. Daniel closed the folder and felt his heart beat fast, not with fear, but with purpose. For 2 years, the world forgot Daniel Carter, but while they slept peacefully, the man they erased was quietly preparing to walk back into their lives, and this time, he wasn't coming to ask questions. "He shouldn't be here." The chairman's voice shook as he stared at the printed guest list, his finger frozen on one name he believed was buried forever. The federal hearing room in Washington, D.C. buzzed with noise, reporters whispering, cameras clicking, lawyers adjusting papers, but that single name sucked the air out of his lungs. "Daniel Carter." "Relax," another board member muttered, forcing a smile. "He disappeared, probably hiding in shame." The chairman nodded, but his hands would not stop trembling. Then the doors at the back of the room opened, and every sound died at once. Daniel walked in calmly. No suit, no tie, just a simple jacket and clear eyes that held no fear. Gasps rolled through the room like a wave. "That's him," someone whispered. "The fired CEO." Cameras snapped wildly as Daniel moved forward, each step heavy with 2 years of silence. The chairman stood up fast. "This is a mistake," he shouted. "He has no right to be here." Daniel stopped and spoke, his voice steady but sharp. "I was invited," he said. The judge looked down from the bench. "By whom?" Daniel raised a single folder. "By the truth," he answered. Murmurs spread. The chairman leaned toward him, face pale. "You should have stayed gone," he hissed. Daniel leaned closer, meeting his eyes. "You should have stopped stealing," he replied quietly. The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Carter, do you have evidence to support your claims?" Daniel nodded and stepped forward, placing the folder on the table. "Every dollar? Every email? Every lead told in my name," he said. A woman on the board whispered, "This can't be happening." Daniel looked around the room, his voice softer now, more human. "You erased me," he said, "but you forgot something. I built this company. I know where the bones are buried." The judge opened the folder, eyes widening. Reporters leaned forward. The chairman sank slowly back into his chair as if the ground had given up on him. Outside the room, police officers quietly took their positions. Inside, Daniel stood tall, realizing the moment he had waited for had finally arrived, and once the truth started speaking, it would not stop. "Read it out loud," Daniel said calmly, and the sound of his voice made the room feel smaller, tighter, like the walls were leaning in to listen. The judge adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the pages, and with every turn, the color drained from the faces at the long table. Bank records showed money moving in the middle of the night. Emails revealed secret orders to hide losses. Signatures appeared again and again, Daniel's name used after the day he was fired. "That signature is fake," one board member shouted, standing up to Fast. "He's lying." Daniel didn't raise his voice. "Check the dates," he said. The judge did, and the room exploded into whispers. "This email was sent 3 weeks after Mr. Carter's removal," the judge said slowly. A woman on the board began to cry. Another man wiped sweat from his forehead, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his pen. The chairman tried to speak, but his words came out broken. We had no choice," he said. Daniel turned to him, eyes steady, voice full of quiet pain. "You had every choice," he replied. "You just chose yourselves." One by one. Board members started pointing fingers, blaming each other, begging to make deals. The judge raised his hand. "Enough," he said firmly. "This court will hear the full truth." Daniel took a deep breath and spoke again, this time not as a CEO, but as a man who remembered the workers, the families, the nights he stayed late to protect them. "You stole from people who trusted you," he said. "Then you destroyed my name so you could sleep at night." Cameras caught every word. The chairman slumped back in his chair, his power leaking away with every second. Outside the room, sirens began to wail softly, growing louder, closer. A reporter whispered, "Arrests are coming." Daniel felt his heart pound, not with joy, but with relief. He had carried this truth alone for 2 long years. As the judge closed the folder and looked up, his voice turned sharp and final. "Court is adjourned," he said, "and this investigation is far from over." At that moment, the doors opened again, and this time, uniformed officers stepped inside, eyes locked on the board members. As the reality they feared finally walked into the room, the clinking of handcuffs echoed through the grand hearing room, a sound louder than any speech, louder than any denial. Board members froze as officers moved in, one by one, reading rights, and for the first time, the people who once controlled thousands of lives felt powerless. Daniel Carter stood silently at the edge, his hands folded, watching the men and women who had erased him tremble like children. The chairman's face was pale, his tie crooked, his voice gone. You can't do this," he stammered. But no one listened. The officers were already guiding him toward the door. Reporters' flashlights, capturing every moment, and every camera seemed to whisper the truth Daniel had carried for 2 long years, that lies built on fear eventually crumble. One young officer glanced at him, admiration in his eyes. "You were right all along," he said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't smile yet. Relief was still heavy in his chest. Outside, the rain had started, falling softly over the city, washing the streets that had once cheered the powerful and ignored the wronged. Ruth appeared at his side, hands tucked in her coat pockets, eyes calm. "They're finished," she said, as if reading the silence of the world. Daniel nodded slowly. "No," he said. "Justice is finished, but truth lasts longer than anyone's fear." A reporter ran up, asking for a statement. Daniel looked at the officers leading the arrested, at the cameras capturing every heartbeat, and at the streets outside where lives had been waiting for honesty. "I'm building something honest now," he said simply, voice steady. Ruth smiled, a rare softness crossing her face. "And this time," she said, "no one can erase it." Daniel's gaze lifted to the skyline, rain shimmering over the glass towers. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Calm. He had lost everything, and yet, in losing, he had discovered something greater than power. He had discovered that patience and truth were louder than wealth, louder than fear, louder than anyone who thought they were untouchable. And for the first time, Daniel Carter let himself breathe fully, knowing that the next chapter, his real comeback, was about to begin. Months passed, but Daniel Carter didn't rush. He didn't storm back into the world that had destroyed him. Instead, he built quietly, patiently, like he had spent the last 2 years learning. His new office was small, simple, but alive. Open windows, honest workers, laughter in the halls. No grand signs, no flashing logos, no pretenses. A young employee approached him one morning, carrying a stack of papers. "Mr. Carter," she said nervously, "why did you come back? Why not stay gone?" Daniel looked around at the team, people who smiled without fear, who spoke freely, who knew their work mattered. He thought of the thousands of faces he had seen during his exile, workers who had been silenced, families who had been cheated, friends who had disappeared when power turned its back. "Because silence lets lies grow," he said quietly, his voice soft but firm. The young employee blinked. "But why not fight louder?" Daniel shook his head, smiling faintly. "Fighting loud only makes people listen to your anger. Waiting, observing, building truth quietly, that's how you win for everyone. Not just yourself." Outside, the city pulsed with life. Tall towers gleamed in the sun. Traffic hummed like it had always hummed. But inside Daniel's small office, something new had taken root. A company where honesty mattered more than wealth, where people knew that courage could be quiet, and where leadership was measured by integrity, not fear. Ruth stopped by briefly, placing her hand on his shoulder. "They'll never expect you now," she said. Daniel nodded. "Exactly. That's the point." And in that small, honest office, Daniel Carter finally felt the weight of exile lift. He had been erased, humiliated, and betrayed, but, in silence and patience, he had built something no one could destroy. The city outside buzzed, unaware that a man once thought broken had quietly become unstoppable. And for the first time in years, Daniel smiled, not for revenge, not for power, but because the world had finally caught up to truth. Years later, Daniel Carter stood in a crowded university auditorium, speaking to students who had never known his name, who had never seen the walls of power he had walked through. He looked out at their eager faces and felt the weight of every moment that had brought him here, the betrayal, the exile, the quiet 2 years of learning and waiting, and finally, the comeback. One student raised her hand and asked, "Mr. Carter, how did you survive when everyone turned against you?" Daniel smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the pain and hope of the journey. "One sentence," he said, "and a choice. The sentence I said to the board that day: if I walk out that door, this company will not survive what's coming." That sentence didn't win the battle, but it reminded me of my courage, and the choice to wait, to build quietly, to trust truth more than fear. That's what brought justice. The room was silent, hanging on his words. "Power can be loud," Daniel continued, "but it isn't always strong. Silence, patience, and truth, they can move mountains. When you see injustice, don't just shout. Observe, learn, and act wisely. That's how you change the world, even if it feels like the world has already forgotten you." Students nodded, pen scribbling, hearts stirred by the story of the man who had lost everything yet found more than anyone could take away. Outside, the city thrummed with life, but Daniel knew something had shifted, not just for him, but for everyone who would hear his story. Because honesty and courage, even in the smallest moments, grow louder than lies, taller than greed, and last far longer than fear. He took a deep breath, looked around the room one last time, and whispered to himself, "Justice isn't instant, but it always arrives." And in that quiet moment, the man who had been erased, humiliated, and exiled finally understood the truest power of all: the strength of the human spirit, the courage to wait, and the unwavering truth that even a single sentence, spoken with honesty and conviction, can change everything. Moral, courage, and truth, even in silence, are stronger than fear and lies. Patience, integrity, and standing for what is right will always outlast betrayal, and one honest sentence can change a life and the world.